So I've been thinking about this idea of adaptations lately, and especially the ones that we form in the younger years of our life when we are mostly woefully uninformed about the world and how it works, about life and experience and those kind of things. And I've been thinking about the mechanisms that they put in place before we're even aware, that spend so much time running on their own in the background that we eventually lose track that they're even running and stop even looking for signs that they are running. I was thinking specifically about, even though it was a little bit later in my life, uh, when I was 19 years old, which isn't later in my life, obviously, but when I was 19 years old, I was in a car accident. My brother and I were driving down the road, and I had my left leg tucked back under the seat of the car. And we got rear-ended pretty hard, and it was raining, so we slid up and hit the car in front of us. So it was kind of a, kind of a whiplashy motion. But because of the position of my leg, I ended up basically blowing out the disc between my L5 and L6 vertebrae in my lower back, and it smashed into my pelvic bone and completely crushed the sciatic nerve, which left me with a pretty severe pain all the way down my left leg, and numbness in some of my toes. It shifted how I could walk. I was felt completely crippled, and I went to the chiropractor immediately. And he tried to help me for about 6 months, and then he figured it's just still not working. I went through a series of, physical therapies. I had some cortisone injections shot into my spine. I did all kinds of things that I could think of to try to fix my situation. And then when I was around 35, I guess, uh, I re-injured it moving. So all of a sudden, I'm this much older. I'd finally gotten into somewhat of a life surrounding that and all the compensations. And then I was just completely destroyed physically again. At this point in time, I'd been carrying so much extra weight for so long that uh, I had a pretty bleak set of options in front of me, right? It was, you're probably going to continue to get bigger. You're going to continue to feel worse. The sedentary lifestyle is going to continue to wear you down until eventually you end up on a bunch of medications and you can't walk without assistance, and on and on and on. You've seen where that all goes, right? I was thinking about all these people I know who just are at the end stages of their life that are in such horrible shape, that they literally, if they didn't have some kind of assistance on a daily, and in some cases hourly basis, they would just die. And that's really where I felt like I was going. I felt like my options were so limited because of my physical limitations and because I'd spent so long dealing with those limitations. And then I found jujitsu, and jujitsu started passing along information. And that information started to increase my awareness. That's important because I thought that I had a pretty good beat on where things were. Like, I thought I knew pretty well where I was physically and what my options were. I had tried so many things, right? Back surgery was one possible option down the road, which quite frankly just sounded like a shit show to me. And I was not even close to interested in that. So I thought, without having back surgery, which is almost guaranteed to not only not work, but it's guaranteed to make my situation worse over time. Um, they just didn't have, even the science on it wasn't caught up to where it is now as far as recovering discs and things like that. But regardless, I walked into jujitsu crippled and basically hoping rather than believing that this might be a possible solution that could give me a slightly better stab at life, I guess. Walking in there when I was 39, and just convinced that I was on the downhill side of a really horrible battle, and then finding out that wasn't true. And so what that awareness did and what awareness does is it gives us options, and it gives us more options, right? In this case, it was great because the options it gave me were overwhelmingly positive. Like I could walk better. I was gaining flexibility. I was recovering some of my lost strength. I was increasing my flexibility. I was dealing with claustrophobia issues and weakness and helplessness issues and all the things that jujitsu very kindly pries out of your life for you. I was dealing with all those things. And every time I took another step forward in my journey, I gained more awareness and I gained more options. It was like a new lease on life. Like like I had been sat down in the electric chair and strapped in, and a minute to midnight the governor called. That's what it felt like. Like, you're not going to die sick. You're going to live strong. You think about the difference in those things. It started to make me respect myself a little bit more. It started to make me change the way I thought about my relationship with food, what I thought about my relationship with sleep. It started to make me think about the junk that I allowed in my system. And now, I mean, obviously, I'm a human being. It didn't flip a switch like that. I'm still working through a lot of that journey right now. But it gave me options. And I was so excited because to me, options are freedom. If you have no options, I mean, that's the definition of being enslaved, right? You have no control. You have no say over what happens. Wherever life pushes you, that's where you're going. And now all of a sudden, I've got all these options. Now, I'm using a sunny example, right? Sometimes awareness of a situation creates options that really fucking suck. They're really terrible. Sometimes it takes, I guess maybe not take, feels like it's taking more than it's giving, right? You've heard that saying, ignorance is bliss. I think that is the biggest load of horse shit I've ever heard in my life. Ignorance leaves you open to being blindsided. So we're talking about something that may be really difficult, right? And I mean, the name of this podcast is Sweeter After Difficulty. But we're talking about something that might be hard. You know, what if you find out some information about someone that you love that's terrible? What options does that present? I mean, like I said, you're not guaranteed to get good options in life all the time. But you know, when I talk about options, what I'm really thinking about is I'm thinking about like a kid, right? Like for a kid, your first option is no. Right? There's no, it's just one, you got one option. Somebody wants you for something, you say no. Somebody asks you if you want something, you say no, right? At some point, the answer to every question is no. But then you learn that no doesn't open all the doors that you want it to open. And so you learn more answers. You learn how to say yes to the things that you do want and that you do like. And then eventually you learn maybe, right? And now you've got 3 options because your awareness has now opened your eyes to the fact that sometimes you may feel like doing something, you may not feel like doing something, and you're just not sure at the moment. And maybe that takes you down the road of awareness to I don't know. What a beautiful place I don't know is. I mean, we live in a culture right now where you better know. And everyone that presents themselves as an expert, they all know, right? They've got all the answers. But sometimes you have to wonder if they have all the answers, then why does their life seem to look like it does from the outside? I mean, you don't want to judge other people's lives just from the outside looking in, right? But there are some times when things are just displayed in front of you that you have no idea, you don't have a choice but to witness them. And you wonder, this person was just lecturing me on how to have a happy life or be happy in my job or have a happy marriage. And that looks kind of crazy, right? It slowed me down in the best way. But what if those options suck? Then what? Well, if you know that you don't like the options you have, then one of those options is always go and try to find more information. Seek to raise your level of awareness. And what's that going to do? It's going to give you more options, right? Maybe some of those don't suck as bad as the ones you had. Really think about how far-reaching the application of that idea is. There may be no immediate great options to escape the circumstances that you're currently in, but are they available in 5 years if you worked at it every day? Are they available in 10? Because one of the things they told me when I came to Jiu Jitsu was it's going to take you 10 years to get your black belt on average. The crazy thing about thinking about a decade of your life going by before you achieve that level of proficiency in something, it takes away your idea about thinking about shortcuts and fast paths and instant results and instant gratification. It takes all that away. It's just one humiliating humbling after another until you learn to love being humbled. It doesn't even become a thing where you start, even if you start humbling people, there's always a bigger fish, right? Just because the options aren't good doesn't mean that you can't be looking for more options. It doesn't mean you can't be out there trying to raise your own awareness. I love that idea because it ties my freedom directly to the amount of effort, I guess, that I put in to seeking to raise up the best possible options for myself. Like I said, jiu-jitsu made me start to respect things while I still had a choice, right? And this is where we come to, because your options are your choices. So think of all the things I was just saying and reframe it that way. Information raises your awareness, and awareness gives you more choices. Now, at this phase of my life, I'm making a really concerted effort not to recommend choices. I might give advice or throw my opinion in there some way or another during the conversation, but the effort is I'm trying to stop the practice at raising options and then leaving you to make your own choices and counting on you to leave me to make mine. Think about that, what that does to the conversation, right? If you unbuckle the choice that you're going to make, or the choice the person that you're having a conversation with is going to make at the end of that conversation, you know what choices you gave them. You know what options you raised in the awareness phase of the conversation, right? You presumably gave them some information. They gave you some information. Both of you have now raised your level of awareness and both of you have more options. But think if that's where it stops, right? What if I just listen to you and you listen to me and then I didn't tell you what to choose? Because the thing about this whole situation is that's where the rubber meets the road. What you choose ultimately becomes your character. I can't be responsible for that. I can't even affect that. Even if you're interested in what I have to say, or you're, it makes you happy or it makes you sad or whatever, if you're emotionally affected one way or another during our conversation, you still have the rest of your life in those moments where you sit and think, in those times between times when you're just processing. You still have all that time to decide which choices you're going to make. And I'm probably not going to be a factor in the equation the vast majority of the time. So why would I try to claim ownership over that? Because I want you to make a different choice? Because I wish you would? Because it hurts me that you don't? Well, all of that may be true. All of that is information. That raises your awareness, and now you can add those 3 options I just gave you to your list of options. Again, none of them are great, right? But it's up to you. And it's up to me. We have to be the ones who choose. So when I think about, hard choices, when my boys were growing up, unfortunately, I ended up in a divorce situation, and they were caught right in the middle of it. They were 6 and 8 years old when it started. And it was a really hard time. It was a really hard time for them. It was a really hard time for me. You know, just wouldn't wish it on someone. And going through that with them is different than going through something that sucks on your own. Because like I can take a lot, and I can, if there's no one around, I can kind of, bitch to the universe or whatever. But I mean, that's kind of where it ends. But when something really sucks and you're trying to keep it from affecting your boys, so you have to act like it doesn't suck as much as it does, that is a really hard ball to keep in the air, with all the other things that you're juggling. So they got to the point where they were old enough where they started having options on how much time to spend at each house, options on what kind of clothes they wanted to wear, options on what they like to eat, right? They had all these options popping up, more and more options coming, right? Especially when you're entering those teenage years. And eventually they decided that they were going to come live with me full time. It could not have been an easy choice. And certainly anyone that had any kind of say in it did not make that choice easy on them. They had a rough one, and they were teenage boys. Teenage boys that decided to stand up for themselves. And, again, I'm not here to preach about parenting, but I did teach my boys to stand up for themselves and to stand up for each other. And because of that, they learned how to do that. They had some really shitty options come their way as a result of making that choice. And they dealt with it. They faced them. They faced them time and time again. Everything that got thrown their way, they faced it down. And then both of them decided that they were going to join the military. My older son, Atticus, decided he was going to go into the Marine Corps. And my younger son, Anakin, was going to join the Navy. So they both decided, they both started the process, they both went through it, they both enlisted, and COVID broke out. They went anyway. They both went through their basic training in masks, and both of them refused to take the COVID vaccine. Again, a choice, an option. Not a lot of good ones there. If the answer isn't yes, they're all bad. And they were told some pretty heinous things to try to coerce them into taking those shots. Regardless of how you feel about it, that was their choice not to do it. And as a result, they both were separated from the military. They've both been invited back since. They're both going back, at least as of the time of this recording. But while they were there, they gave me all these stories of going through basic, where some asshole stood up and started picking on someone else, and they ended up getting in fistfights with them, where they fought back against all the bullies and all the people who were trying to cause problems, not just for them, but for other people. They were sticking up for themselves and their brothers. And every time they made one of those choices, it came with more information, which raised their awareness, which gave them more options, and some of those options sucked. And sometimes they took them because they're human beings. We're all human beings. But I've found that every time I stayed curious long enough to gain as much information as I could out of a situation, it always raised my awareness, and my awareness always created options. It applies most excellently to the conversations that you've stopped having with yourself, to the adaptations that you accepted when you were far less mature and far less experienced in life. You had almost no knowledge of how the world worked, and you just made a choice, the best one you could as an uninformed child, to protect yourself. And that mechanism has been functioning ever since. Maybe it's great. Maybe it's still completely appropriate. Maybe it's still helpful. Maybe it still gets you through those times. But I am willing to bet that in the time between when you first implemented those adaptations to today, that you've picked up some experience and some information, that your awareness has been raised, and that now you have more options. And maybe you haven't thought about it. And again, I'm not here to make a moral judgment on your choices. But I think that it's worth the investment. And you're going to hear me say a lot, in the coming days, the first honest conversation is with yourself. I can't think of a more impacting way to spend some time than having a real, deep, honest conversation with myself, where I cut out all the horse shit, where I lay out all the options, where I look at everything I could choose. And then I ask myself, is there anything that I'm not thinking about here? Why do I feel the way I feel about this? And what would be different if I chose a different option? It's worth a try. Because the worst case scenario, right, is that you end up with more options and then you still just choose the one you've been choosing. Life stays the same. It's familiar. It can be comfortable. But I think it's worth knowing. And if it's difficulty that you're avoiding, I think it's worth going through for the sake of the sweetness that comes out of the other side of that. And what is sweeter than freedom? Anyway, that's what I've been thinking about this week. I hope you're having an amazing week. I'm grateful for you. I appreciate that you're always willing to come pull up a chair. And if you see me out, let's talk about it. I can't wait to find out what options you can give me in my life. See you next week.